Dana Denha here, and this is Let's Watch with the Ann Arbor Film Festival. Ann Arbor's annual film festival celebrates arts and artists of mediums of all kinds. Obviously, films are a major highlight of this 6-day arts extravaganza, but organizers also strive to make it an interactive experience. Joining me is Dawn Rowe, an artist dedicated to environmental stewardship, taking part in the 2023 Ann Arbor Film Festival Off the Screens program. Welcome to the show, Dawn.
Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me to do this. This is awesome.
You know, one of the first things I always like to ask people is sort of about your background and your schooling and what led you to being an artist.
Yeah, always the interesting, potentially really long answer question. Well, I am originally from Michigan. I'm actually originally from Sault Ste. Marie in the Upper Peninsula. And I had a brother and sister that were actually really strong artists. They don't practice artists and they aren't practicing artists in their adult life, but I just grew up with a lot of kind of drawing and making things but was never really kind of thinking that was my particular path per se. And then in my younger years, or like my late teens, early 20s, I just became involved in a kind of a subcultural scene with a lot of poets and artists and musicians. I lived in Ann Arbor for a bit, and then I moved to Portland, Oregon. And it was there that I really just kind of got involved in the kind of DIY culture where we just kind of made a lot of things happen for ourselves and for the community. And it was really fun and energizing. And there I connected with a place called the Northwest Film Center, which still exists and was so pivotal in my kind of development as an artist. I studied with some amazing filmmakers there, N.E.A. Weisberg and Bushra Azuz in particular, who sadly passed recently. But so at the Film Center, I found out that they did a cooperative program with a place called Marylhurst College at the time, where you could do your Bachelor of Fine Arts degree. And so I ended up pursuing that. And I was in my like mid-20s by that point. So I was kind of a non-traditional student. So pursued a Bachelor of Fine Arts degree, had a really fantastic art faculty at Marylhurst as well. It was this kind of really perfect coupling of the Film Center and a liberal arts college. And then I went on to graduate school in Illinois and began kind of a teaching career as well. So at this point, I just became kind of I am now an academic working artist, which is the craziest thing because that is not, I didn't have a particular sort of path that I had set out to make my way to do exactly that at any point. But I'm glad that I got here. That was a little bit of a wacky answer.
You talk about, growing up in Sault Ste. Marie, and when I was looking you up a little bit, you talk about how the Great Lakes actually are an influence on your work. Can you discuss that further?
Yeah, my current work. So the work that I'm showing as part of Off the Screen was made from like 2017 to 2019. And it was specific to the Pacific Northwest in relation to, and we'll talk about this a bit probably, but Pacific yew trees. And from there, my projects tend to kind of take these paths where I'm thinking about one set of things and it just kind of organically leads me to another. And so the work that I'm currently working on is water-based. So it's thinking about fish and fish habitats as a way of thinking about broader social relations and environmental relations. And so the lockdown had a lot to do with this, interestingly enough. So I had a research leave from my teaching position, and I was able to go on sabbatical, and I had put out proposals to do work in some various places, and I was unable to do a certain kind of traveling. So I thought that going home might be an interesting and sort of necessary thing in a lot of ways. And because of that, I then realized how just transformational the growing up with the Great Lakes, around us, anywhere that you live or are from in Michigan, the Great Lakes are around you, right? I happen to have spent my earliest years in a place where it's Lake Superior and then kind of the St. Mary's River. And so I just really started to recognize how just like how much of an impact that had on my perception. Like, you know, when you're sort of thinking about driving through spaces where there's sort of water in your periphery. And so, but not only that, but also I've been doing a lot of reckoning with my own sort of ancestry in relation to what it means to come from settler ancestry in a place that has such rich Indigenous history and just a really strong and vital Indigenous community presence currently. So there's a lot of really tricky stuff that I'm thinking through related to that. That is, I just keep telling everyone, like, this is the work that I'm doing. I think will be the work that I do now. It's an inexhaustible thing to kind of grapple with these things and sort through contemporary issues with water globally, right? So, yeah.
Well, and you also approach your work with land and water as, you say, an uninvited guest. Talk about this approach and how you accomplish it.
Yeah, well, that's what I meant about just reckoning with these situations and the nature of, yes, I am from Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan. But my family only goes back 4 generations in that space, which is a decent span of time, but not at all comparable to many families that have been there for many, many more generations. And so how we ended up there, we weren't invited to come on over. I honestly don't know a ton about my own family background, other than came from various European spaces through Canada and wound up in Sault Ste. Marie. And so, but it's necessary, or I don't know, for myself, it's necessary to kind of sort through how I did wind up where I did and what it means to be in relation with a landscape that is not my own, but that is the landscape that is the only kind of home that I will ever know. So I wanted to also kind of just acknowledge that I work with a camera in these spaces, right? And so that's a very specific and significant thing as well. So that's a lot of what I've been reckoning with, is like, well, we often think about when we're photographing or filming or videotaping people or groups of people, most of us, or a lot of us, want to be mindful of, oh, let me make sure that I'm also not an uninvited guest here, and that I'm maybe seeking a certain kind of permission, or at the very least kind of acknowledging and letting someone know that I'm going to be recording their likeness. But the fact that we don't often think of that in relation to land and other, more than human beings, is something that I'm very much putting at the front of the way I'm approaching my work currently. And I will admit that I did not always do this. I often would, because I work in landscape largely. And so I'm just trying to sort out ways to kind of seek different types of permission, which isn't always literal, right? But just to be basically as mindful and respectful as possible when I'm working in landscapes that have really rich histories, which is every landscape, right? So, yeah, I hope that's kind of answering around your question.
And what about this environmental aspect of your work? Do you foresee this continuing throughout your career and sort of putting a forefront on issues that are obviously plaguing everyone?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really challenging time to be making work that engages with our planet that is in turmoil, right? But this isn't necessarily new. It's just become like increasingly rapid, sort of what's happening. And so I will also say that for years, I kind of, and this is still true to a certain extent, I do look at landscape as being a particularly kind of perceptual space. That's kind of what I meant too when I was talking about the sort of phenomenological way that land and water affects just kind of our vision and our perception. So I mean, I do approach it like environmental spaces in relation to how they activate our our sort of minds poetically and through perception. But it has become just increasingly more clear that, yeah, you can't just you cannot not be thinking about the environmental um, sort of catastrophe that is rapidly kind of unfolding in front of our eyes. So it's always been sort of underneath the work, but it's becoming more and more surfaced, I suppose. So, and I will say too that I'm not like a socio-political artist per se. So my work isn't documentary in that it doesn't tell kind of a story. It doesn't, I mean, I hope it provides some use, but it doesn't provide like specific information about a set of things, but it instead offers suggestions and different ways of looking at and thinking about different areas of our world, I hope. So I mean, this is something I have to think about more. Like, do I have to sort of reshape the way that I'm approaching my work so that it does serve, a more vital purpose, perhaps? We'll see. But to answer the question, yeah, I mean, I don't see my work not connecting with our environmental conditions anytime soon.
Well, let's watch Dawn's film, Conditions for an Unfinished Work in Mourning, Wretched Yew. We're back with Dawn Rowe. Dawn, why don't you tell us about the inspiration for the yew tree and why you wanted to highlight it in this work?
Yeah, that's another. There will be no question answered without a long-winded sort of, because it is ever. That's what I was kind of saying earlier about the way my projects tend to be one set of things I'm thinking about to another, and kind of meanders, and there's different things that inform one approach or another. And so, what first led me to work with the yew tree was there is a beautiful book by Virginia Woolf called The Waves. That many people might be familiar with. And there is a passage, there's actually a couple passages in there, but one in particular where she talks about the yew tree. The line is something along the lines of, let it blaze out against the yew trees, one life there, over and done with. And so Virginia Woolf, I've connected with for years as someone that really engages with loss and longing, and obviously these just beautifully poetic ways. And so I really fixated on, I didn't know what the yew tree was, for one thing. It's a widely known species in parts of the UK where Virginia Woolf would have been writing from. And then so I started researching the yew tree and got really intrigued by its associations with death and regeneration. So it's this particular mythology. And then I learned that there was a species in the Pacific Northwest called Pacific yew. And then I learned about this other kind of history that connected to its, there's a compound found in its bark that was used for breast cancer treatment drug. And so this led to many of the trees being completely destroyed and almost completely eradicated the species in the 1990s. And so I just started thinking about all the sort of messiness of these things together, and these kind of cycles of neglect, as I've described it when I talked about it before. And as you can see, or you just saw, I guess, in the video, the tree is just gorgeous. You know, it just has this like ability to grow in these really tangled ways. And some of the trees in the video were really old growth trees, and many hundreds of years old. And they're super resilient. So you can kind of cut them down to almost nothing and they start sprouting back. So yeah, I mean, that tells you some of the things that got me interested in the yew tree, but it was also about my own connection and my own history in the Pacific Northwest during this period of time when you would see a lot of clear-cut hillsides, and also just tumultuous personal histories. And there are musicians involved in the work as well. So yeah, it's a nice, beautiful, tangly mess, I hope.
Well, how can people experience this work at the 2023 Ann Arbor Film Festival Off the Screens, and where will it be?
So apparently it's going to be at the North Quad. Is that the place I told you?
Yep, North
I'm
Quad.
trying
Yeah.
to remember all the names of the buildings. And so I believe it's on the ground floor space, and there's this space where there are 6 video monitors that are kind of permanently there, and I'll be showing. So the piece that was just screened, you probably noticed there were superimposed images within the single channel work. And it was actually originally designed to be kind of a multi-channel work. So I'm going to those will be pulled apart, and you'll see silent versions of each of those streams on the 6 monitors in the sort of lobby area there, as well as there are 2D works, printed photographic analog-based prints. You saw some of those being made in the video as well, that will be displayed on the walls. And so I'm kind of excited about seeing this. I'll be there as well, in a silent form, particularly as there's this really guttural scream that happens from a friend of mine that I really like the idea of seeing that silent. And then you can see it with the sound as well in an interior space in that same building. So yeah, that's how it will be seen.
Interesting. Yeah, I didn't even, because it is like that scream is such a major part of the film when you're watching it, that it's hard to imagine it without sound.
Well, and it's interesting because when I edit video, I do everything. I lay out the visuals before I do the audio tracks underneath. So I looked at it without sound for a really, really long time. So I'm very sort of aware of how that registers in that way. So yeah, it's interesting though. Yeah.
Well, before we go, why don't you tell people why they should support the Ann Arbor Film Festival, Off the Screens, films, being a visitor, being an artist in any way?
Yeah, I mean, I think communities should continue supporting these kinds of film festivals in every way that they can. They're so vital to just and providing different ways of viewing our world, right? And film festivals are so great too, because as an artist that works with video largely in kind of gallery format, there is a reluctance at times for viewers to sit with a work when you're in a museum gallery space for the sort of duration. So the durational nature of moving image work does require time. And so when you're at a film festival, you are invited to sit during these screening programs and really just be with the work for the duration of whatever the screening program you're seeing is. So I think that's such an important format basically for film-based works. And then to have the ability to go to things like Off the Screen and see how artists and filmmakers are also working with moving image materials in installation-based form just provides such a great sort of relationship between the two. Yeah.
Well, I want to thank you, Dawn, for being a guest on the show. It was great talking.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. And I hope I see some of you at the festival.
To watch this and other CTN series, visit youtube.com/CTN Ann Arbor. And remember to like, subscribe, and share. I'm Dana Denhofer. Let's watch with the Ann Arbor Film Festival.